They fed a generation, then vanished without a sound. 30 lunches once packed with love, now buried under plastic wrappers and drive-through noise. What happened to the meals that made us feel full in more ways than one? Potatoes had more use than just what was under all the layers. Once peeled, people would often fry the potato skins as a midday snack. Nothing would ever go to waste in homes back then, as you must have gathered by now. If they can make stuff out of sausage drippings and drain the fat from bacon to reuse, frying up some potato skins does not seem that out of the box at all. These fried skins were the perfect sidekick to potato pancakes, and the fact that the skins had a lot of health benefits made it all the more appealing. Things like this really helped to keep appetites in check, and that meant that the financial situation of the home would be calmer too. Chicken a la king and puff pastry was another little nugget of French culture and cuisine that served us pretty well. So the idea here this time was to stuff creamy chicken and mushrooms into one single pastry, and there would be lots of these individual pastries, each stuffed to the brim. By now, we're talking about somewhere along the 70s. America's always been a big fan of cream. There's really no denying that, but I would say that we've warmed up to mushrooms a lot more than we used to. I don't think they were not popular, but they weren't exactly a standout ingredient that would be making anyone's top 10 or top 5 either. Americans were changing their palates regarding mushrooms thanks to two things, though. One, they had built up a fondness for it thanks to how many Americans, especially ones living on the edges of urban hubs, relied on foraging wild mushrooms. Two, things like cream soups, such as cream of mushroom soups, were already making the pairing of cream and mushrooms popular. This take on puff pastry wasn't exactly a long shot, since the stage was pretty much mostly set. However, I think most people have opted for things like sandwiches and ordering takeout at lunch now, or just getting a coffee. Work cultures really changed, and having a full-fledged meal during your 15-minute break isn't the most appealing option to a lot of people nowadays. If you've ever walked the streets of downtown New York, I'm sure you're familiar with the infamous pastrami on rye. If your grandma's from the Big Apple, chances are her recipe is highly regarded. This sandwich became a staple in Jewish delis in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, thanks to Eastern European immigrants. This one just featured an old-fashioned slice of pastrami on rye bread and a dollop of mustard. Grandma knew that when it came to sandwiches, sometimes less is more, and pastrami on rye is the perfect example of that. But hey, don't forget no pastrami on rye is complete without a pickle on the side. The tartness of a dill pickle or the sweetness of a bread and butter pickle is the perfect contrast to the savory pastrami. When life hands you a cow but almost nothing else, you cook the cow's brains. Fried cow brains, or calf's brains, if you want to sound a bit more gourmet, was a Dust Bowl specialty not because people wanted to eat it, but because they had to. They were not fastidious in the past. When you had to fight for your life, you ate everything that was on the animal. Now I know that fried cow brains may sound like something that shouldn't even be considered food, let alone something that might be considered delicious. For this dish, brains were washed in water or milk, dredged in flour, and fried until brown and crispy. Consider them as the first-generation chicken nuggets, if chicken nuggets had a soft core and came with a helping of angst. The flavor? It was mild, almost buttery, and that was the reason why nobody fled from the dish when somebody served it. Cow brains fried were dense in nutrients, especially protein, and thus a good meal during famine. While nowadays people might shudder at the thought of consuming brains, in the past, it was simply Tuesday's supper. And hey, if you put some gravy on top, it might just seem like you're eating gourmet food. Forage mushrooms didn't always lining our burgers and topping our pizzas. For a majority of its history, it was really just something people ate when things were super bad. There was nothing to eat and people basically just had to forage for whatever they could. The most popular of this was the button mushroom, but they definitely tried to forage as much as they could. Now, despite this, mushrooms were still considered really low class. People had just begun to associate it with nothing but poverty and hard times. It wasn't until the middle and the later end of the 20th century that mushrooms started to become a classic topping you'd see on not just burgers and pizzas, but steaks, chicken dishes, sandwiches, and all kinds of soups and stews. Basically, it's a mushroom world, and we're just living in it now. A big part of this is how canned mushrooms became so accessible. Another reason is that an interest in European cuisine led to a massive boom in cream of soups and cream of mushroom soups. Share some of your favorite mushrooms with us right now in the comments. Dandelion salad might sound like a fairy tale-like name for an incredibly frugal but delicious meal. By now, you might have noticed the scavenger vibe in terms of ingredients of the dishes so far. People making anything out of whatever they had on hand. Economic downturns often feature lifestyle changes, and the Great Depression was no other, sending people on a scramble to find and eat anything. Dandelion salad took scramble seriously as the meal involved finding and foraging dandelions. You would cut out all the roots, flowers, and waste to make the dressing for a very healthy salad. For people, especially those on a diet and a budget, this was a godsend. For a garnish, all people would usually put on it was lemon juice and olive oil, a dash of salt, and you were good to go at basically no cost. Potato pancakes are one that we are very sad to have seen fade away from the arsenal of home chefs. Pancakes made with matzo or applesauce topped with garlic or fried onions made for such a mouth-watering meal. Low-income households back in those times were struggling to buy produce. Farmers' markets were uniformly unaffordable for middle-income households due to creeping inflation. People needed a vegetable that was cost-appropriate and easy to make in batches. Enter the potato pancake, which revolutionized the breakfast scene in a struggling time. As times improved, people slowly started going to more fancier and creative breakfasts, unfortunately leaving simpler dishes behind. Potato pancakes took a backseat in the face of changing food and economic trends, but anyone from the era will rave to you about the godsend these were. If you believe that using every part of the animal is a modern concept, you are mistaken. Dust Bowl families were not sparing any part of the pig, including the snout. Pig snouts breaded might sound like something you dare a friend to eat, but during the Great Depression, it was a delicacy. When meat was a rare commodity, the snout was a cheap source of something meaty, chewy, and quite palatable. The snouts were washed, cooked until soft, and then breaded before being deep-fried to golden brown. The result? A crispy outside and a very tasty meat on the inside. Well, yes, the texture may have been somewhat unusual, but when you are hungry, you don't mind. Real quick, if you're loving this content as much as we loved making it, hit subscribe to stay connected and help us reach even more amazing folks like you. To Dust Bowl families, pig snouts breaded were not just edibles, but a way to pay tribute to every pound of what little they had. No part was wasted, while such meals ensured that scarcity became resourcefulness. Nowadays, breaded pig snouts can be found only in some culinary forums, but they are a vivid example of how people tried to feed themselves when there were no chips, but snouts. Would I try it? To put it in perspective, if my grandma was to prepare it with a wink and a smile, I'd be willing to take a bite. Indeed, when you survive, you become brave and perhaps a little curious. But would you try it? Leave us the answer in the comments below. So far, we have two solid options for salads with a sandwich variation for one of them, but what if you do not like protein in your salads? Want them on the sweeter, more dessert-y side? Then molded cranberry orange salads have your name written on them wrapped up in a bow. Some normal or raspberry gelatin and frozen cranberries, plus apples and oranges cut into wedges, would make for an incredibly sweet and delightful salad that had everything you wanted in it taste-wise. It also did wonders for your skin with a steady supply of vitamins and the benefits of cranberries. So not only would grandmothers make this for their beloved families, but they would sneak a bowl on the side for themselves too. Despite the ingredients being relatively easy to get, this was more of an upper-class dish popular in affluent areas. Who says you need apples to make an apple pie? Not the Depression era, folks, that's for sure. This mock apple pie was a genius hack that used Ritz crackers as the crust and a sweet, sticky filling made from sugar, cinnamon, and water. It was a budget-friendly dessert that satisfied the sweet tooth without the need for expensive or hard-to-find ingredients. Plus, Plus, it was a great way to use up those stale crackers lurking in the back of your pantry. The Ritz mock apple pie became a Depression-era favorite, despite the fact that it was a pastry imposter. How did it work? The aromatic mixture of sugar, cinnamon, butter, lemon juice, and crackers combined to convince the taster's senses that the pie actually tasted of apples. Mock apple pie actually dates to the mid-1800s. During the wintertime, when apples were scarce and dried apple stores were used up, inventive home cooks would instead use soda crackers or stale bread. The more modern Ritz cracker version came about in the 1930s. Brown Betties were one of the most classic American desserts to ever grace the table of an American kid. Something that might be seen as an old-fashioned dessert now, but used to be the next best thing after an apple pie. The flavors of a Brown Betty usually come from the spiced apples and other fruit-layered dishes, which are really buttery. The sugary breadcrumbs on top give it a crunch, which really adds to the entire vibe of the Brown Betty. You're looking for a warm, comforting dish that gets you in a nostalgic mood. Something you can sit down with and enjoy bite for bite, not rush through. It's an experience that you want to savor, like an empty, windy street as you walk down by and enjoy it. The Brown Betty was definitely something that would get you up out into the street, whether you were going to visit your grandma's for an authentic pie or a nearby bakery to reminisce about childhood days. The earliest recipes you can find are the ones from 1866, but those are more like apple betties than the ones we're talking about. Either way, this dish has definitely evolved alongside the population, and those who grew up with it will remember it fondly. Are you a big fan of deli food? Deli meats, sandwiches, loaves, that kind of thing? Then one of the best parts of that kind of eating was the olive loaf. It was usually made with pork and beef plus chopped green olives, which is what it became known for. There was a small, brief period before convenience foods started taking over America, where processed meats were really becoming a thing, and this dish was a big part of that time, which arguably spanned all over the 1940s to the 1970s. It had an extremely loyal fan base too, as this was responsible for many deli counters still staying in business. These days, you could find retro stalls that still do a mean olive load, but the days where this was a commonplace item on the street and something you'd see your grandma cooking up are long gone in America's history. People definitely remember the flavors of the Bolognia, the ham loaves, and all the amazing dips they came with, though. Croak Madamees involve layers of melted cheese smothered between freshly baked, crisp white bread. And to top it all off, there's an intense, smoky flavor from the ham. The best part about it is that it takes minutes to make, and it was one of the more fancy dishes that people would create when they were feeling like having a bit of an extravagant dinner. Everyone deserves to treat themselves sometimes, but for home chefs, especially grandparents, the biggest treat is often just seeing everyone eat up every last bite of what they've made. That was never a problem if Croak Madamees were the dish being served, because nobody could resist this classic American sandwich that did more than its fair share of justice to ham. Poached or lightly fried eggs as a topping also made it work a lot better. And by the way, they are called Croak Madamees because the poached eggs seem to resemble women's luxury hats in the 90s. Around the later half of the 20th century, there was this big public paranoia that had spread concerning health and the after effects of the way Americans had been eating. Thanks to all that rage, we got dishes like vegetable aspic cups. See, lots of Americans were coming home to an angry mom, a worried wife, or a dad who just kept saying he wouldn't pay for the doctor's fees when your eating habits would eventually circle back around to bite you. It kind of did set fear into people's hearts, especially since the arguments were so convincing. Who could deny that they were eating Kentucky Fried Chicken and McDonald's like addicts back then, or even now? That's why there was this newfound room for fusion food or experimental recipes like vegetable aspic cups. Before, you could tell somebody about vegetables that were set in these tomato-flavored gelatins, and they'd just laugh at you. A chilled salad on top of that? But thanks to how easy convenience food culture had made things, with how you could just buy gelatin and frozen veggies whenever you needed, this was actually a really solid and healthy work lunch option. When it comes to sandwiches, Only a few were as satisfying as the roast beef sandwich. So, many sandwiches were originally created as a clever way to repurpose leftovers, and this one was no exception. Roast beef sandwiches often started with leftovers from Sunday dinner. The Sunday roast was a time-honored tradition, and any extra beef was used to make delicious sandwiches for lunch the next day. In 1900, the dish was described by the Washington Post as unattractive and as a tired ark in a gravy flood. However, it gained popularity in the coming years when Grandma decided to take matters into her own hands, and by 1931, some critics even went as far as to describe it as a true taste of South Dakota. The bread for Grandma's roast beef sandwich was often homemade, and boy did she know how to dress it up. Whether it was a dollop of horseradish sauce, a spread of mustard, or a smear of mayonnaise, Gram knew exactly what it needed, and if we got lucky, she even snuck in a slice of cheese. Boiled carrot sandwiches was created from the weird culinary gap left by increasing prices and thinner savings accounts. Like we said, people wanted vegetables that ticked the cheaper and tastier most boxes for them. However, even that was getting tough. Some of the worst stretches of the Great Depression left people with frustrations and creativity alike. Whipping up dishes like this was common, and the boiled carrot sandwich definitely stayed during the time because of its simplicity. Americans love a good sandwich, and they adore an easy-to-cook filling. Boiled carrot sandwiches definitely met most of the criteria, as roasting cheese to create an open-faced sandwich was a popular choice. Suffering the same fate as other dishes on this list, the boiled carrot sandwich eventually died out as economic growth increased in America. The key to a good sandwich was in its simple ingredients, and Gram knew it better than anyone. That's why she whipped up the classic chicken salad sandwich anytime we craved some comfort food. Chicken salad has been a beloved dish in American homes since the mid-1800s. Grandma decided to make it into a hearty sandwich to make snack time better. Grandma's version of the chicken salad sandwich often included unique ingredients passed down through generations. Depending on where your grandma hails from, her chicken salad sandwich recipe might have a regional flair. In the South, you might find it spiced with a bit of mustard or pickle juice, while in New England, cranberries might be tossed in for a touch of tartness. Now, I'm not gonna lie, egg and olive sandwiches aren't making anyone's top 3 anytime soon, but they were pretty damn good for the value. I mean, a proper sandwich that's healthy, easy to carry, takes no work at all, and is cheap. That's just a good deal, and the kind of deal that you start compromising on your standards for just a tiny bit. I'm not exactly sure why this ever fell out of favor with people. I think maybe we just moved on from olives, or the specific combination of eggs and olives. Either way, this was one of the most common things to bring. Interestingly enough, though, depending on your neighborhood, office, and job, that would be completely untrue. Egg and olive sandwiches were more so something you would see in working to middle-class offices and neighborhoods, exactly because they were so practical and affordable. You could throw a slice of cheese in there and some leftover ham, and you would pretty much be set for the rest of the shift. However, having that many fried eggs daily wasn't a good idea either. People would keep this in rotation around like 2 or 3 times in a day. Now, this might be an odd pairing to a lot of you, but peanut butter and bacon sandwiches really did hit. Hey, some of you who are 90s kids might even remember. This was basically one of the best lunches you could get, and to be honest, I still think a lot of people do make this even if it's not as popular as it used to be. It was just a flawless idea in concept and execution. Take 2 slices of bread, a dash of peanut butter, and some perfectly well-fried strips of bacon. It's genius. Throw in some iceberg mayo and whatever else it is you like and whatever keeps you going throughout that miserable shift, and you have yourself a full-sized snack and meal. This was basically the reason why this dish got so popular. You could even make 2 of these and still make your daily subway or bus ride if you were living in crowded urban centers. Plus, there was just so much room for variety with a dish like this that a lot of people didn't see the point in changing it up. However, that coffee work culture thing I was talking about is unfortunately a real phenomenon. Somewhere along the line, people really started to abandon the idea of having a solid meal at all for lunch, and I think you only see older workers who were raised in the 20th century still having things like this. The next thing we have on the list is salmon croquettes with creamed spinach. Now on paper, this sounds like just what you would need, right? It's salmon, so there's protein. It's creamed spinach, so you definitely have a side that's jam-packed with nutrition. I mean, it seems ideal. The kind of thing you'd always want to be eating at work. For a long time in the 80s, that was how it worked too. People, particularly those working office and desk jobs, were very fond of this kind of lunch. It was also the perfect change in flavors from what people were originally used to. However, this was probably even more reliant on advanced preparation than egg salad stuffed tomatoes. That just wouldn't work with the way so many people were re-entering the workforce in the second half of the 20th century. It basically meant that your wife would have to stay at home and do kitchen duties every day, and most wives were opting to go to work instead. Labor-intensive meals like this, as a result, just didn't last in the long haul. Prune pudding was one of the more niche dishes that were created during the Great Depression. What really was surprising was that prune pudding extended to the upper royalty as well, since even prominent VIPs would also be real low budget with how they eat. Prune pudding became very popular as a result of the efforts made by First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt, who would serve prune pudding at White House functions. It stained the White House's culinary track record, sure, but earned massive points with the struggling American people. For being made of such a simple ingredient and some syrups of your choice, it was definitely one of the tastiest and cheapest meals to come home to. Egg drop soup for some royal courts was a show of a chef's skill. In 1930, America, the soup became a beloved soup of the masses who were struggling to make an honest paycheck. Bread from last night and eggs beaten so thoroughly that the preparation itself doubled as a forearm workout resulted in an incredibly rich soup. Sometimes, if a home cook felt particularly fancy, they would have chicken either boiled or shredded in the mix. Using the chicken stock was also a common way to not let anything go to waste, since getting the most bang for your buck out of poultry became a habit of everyone. Most would just have this with eggs and throw in some ginger, chives and olives, or anchovies. We would definitely like to see this make a comeback with a less cost-oriented version that really explores the dish. Leftover turkey in the fridge? Consider it your lucky day, because that used to call for Grandma's legendary turkey noodle casserole. This casserole made mornings after Thanksgiving something to look forward to. This was the go-to recipe for using up leftover turkey and noodles after Thanksgiving or Christmas. All Grandma had to do was mix in the ingredients and add a topping made from breadcrumbs, crushed crackers, or even fried onions. Like most of the casseroles on this list, this was also a one-dish wonder and didn't require much labor. And you know, Gram used to be tired from making us a grand feast the night before, so this was an easy way to serve something delicious on the dining table without putting in too much effort. This was a kid-friendly meal that appealed to even the pickiest eaters. What's not to love about a creamy sauce and some noodles all drenched in cheese? So you know how America and pulled pork go together like jam on toast, right? After all, it's something you can feed a whole crowd and have them feeling full and satisfied. It's a showstopper, but you can make a lot of easy things with it. Most dishes you can make and serve will have people asking you what your recipe is, but that's just how easy pulled pork is to work with. So, when I say this next sentence, hear it with an open mind. How do you feel about cherry cola pulled pork? Yeah, slow-cooked, barbecue-y, savory pulled pork left to simmer in a pool of cherry cola, barbecue sauce, and other seasonings. The first time I heard of this dish, I struggled just to imagine all of those flavors in one bite. Like, barbecue sauce is a dip, pulled pork is a main dish, and cherry cola is a drink. You're used to having all that separately, right? Despite that, since it was all made from things that were so readily available in most homes, and since it was right up the alley of home chefs in their slow-cooking era, it took off in a major way. Especially in the South, where everything involved in this dish is something people were already having on a daily basis. What's for dinner? Oh, just a small something that came in from the backyard. Yes, the tumbleweed casserole was a real dish during the Dust Bowl, which just goes to show you that when the going gets tough, the tough make casseroles out of tumbleweeds. Tumbleweeds, those rolling shrubs of the Wild West screen, are actually technically, or at least partially, edible. Not fancy for the tongue, but we are hungry to the bone. Let's give it a try, edible. The process began with the boiling of the tumbleweed leaves to reduce their coarse feel and also to reduce the bitterness of the leaves. Then they'd get layered with whatever ingredients were available, maybe some scraps of meat, potatoes, or canned goods if you were lucky. The result? A surprisingly substantial, earthy-flavored casserole that was as much about sustenance as it was about taste. Tumbleweed is very fibrous and even has a few vitamins in it, so it wasn't the worst thing to eat when fresh greens were scarce. Moreover, tumbleweeds were free and easy to come by, nature's grocery store if you will. Though you'll never see it on the dinner table. Tumbleweed casserole represents Dust Bowl endurance. Would I eat it? Well, I'd need a serious pep talk and a lot of seasoning. But hey, if the tumbleweed can take the hot winds, then it should not be a problem on my plate. Spam and pineapple sandwiches capture a uniquely American taste for sweet and savory combinations that soared in popularity during World War II. Introduced to the American military in 1937, Spam became a staple in many households. The recipe for Spam and pineapple sandwiches represents the culinary influence of Hawaii on the mainland, which intensified after Hawaii became a state in 1959. The sandwich features crispy slices of fried Spam paired with sweet, slightly charred pineapple rings, nestled between slices of toasted bread. This blend of salty meat with the caramelized sweetness of pineapple provides a delightful contrast in flavors. Optionally dressed with mayonnaise or a slice of cheese, these sandwiches reflect a significant Hawaiian influence on mainland American cuisine, particularly during the 1950s when Hawaiian culture gained widespread appeal. The result is a dish that marries diverse culinary traditions in a uniquely satisfying way. Stuffed potato pancakes are a delight to have on their own, but they go great with any kind of syrup or dip too. And if you had grandkids coming over and did not know what to make, this was a surefire bet. Potatoes have always been a massive staple of American cuisine and culture, partly because they form the basis of many simple, affordable dishes. An example of this is how in the Depression there were several potato-based dishes that people regularly adopted, and they stuck in the cultural landscape of American cooking much longer after the dust from the recession had settled. In states like Ohio, Oregon, and Idaho, it is still common to see potato-centered dishes taking the #1 spot. So imagine the rounds they made back when they were truly in style. Taking a break away from the McDonald's and the Wendy's, stuffed potato pancakes usually have bits of meat stuffed in them like sausages, pork, or ground beef. And it is not only packed with flavor, but a great dish to eat if you are looking to bulk up too. Grandma does know best, after all. Cold fried chicken wasn't exactly what the name makes it sound like. You can't really cold fry something, obviously, but what you can do is serve fried chicken that's been chilled, or fried chicken that's at least at room temperature. See, this was something that got popular at picnics, and it was a way for people to get rid of leftovers when they didn't have microwaves. As you might know, fried chicken tends to lose a lot of its charm when you just warm it up on a pan and stove. Now, I'm no one to judge, but that's just not how you do it. Naturally, though, if you don't have a microwave, that's where your head would go, and a lot of people just didn't back then. So, what's the next step? Do we bite the bullet and eat that delicious fried chicken cold or at room temperature? Or do we warm it up and lose a lot of the bang for buck value that comes with a 3-piece combo for like $2 or $3? Most people stuck with the first option. Cold fried chicken would also be good as a work lunch because it was an easy way to get rid of your leftovers if you didn't feel like eating it at home, plus it was super quick. Just grab the fried chicken, box it, and go. You had your work lunch for that day sorted. It caught on a lot more than you'd think, really. Another wonderful appetizer was broiled Parmesan tomatoes, which were ready in about half an hour and were the ideal sidekick for some boiled or fluffy eggs alongside biscuits. Fresh, ripe summer tomatoes, filled with concentrated flavor, topped with an olive oil spray and kosher salt, sound like a really good time, not to mention the main selling point. The Parmesan cheese added so much flavor and style to this that it became a trending option in the mid-90s and was a frequent sight in many cookbooks in the States, especially those aimed at housewives and home chefs. Many of Grandma's broiled Parmesan tomato recipes are available online, showing how they have stood the test of time and continue to be passed down within families. Eggless sponge cakes might be a concept that you cannot imagine or wrap your head around today, but back then, a lot of people skipped the eggs entirely. What people used instead were margarine, sugar, and syrups to get the same vibe. What you got was a crowd entirely in favor of a sponge cake that was airy, fluffy, and made the best of your resources. Wartime brings out the frugality in everyone, but in this case, it brought out the inner baker with a quick fix or workaround for everything. If you did not have ingredients or could not spare them, then you did not have to worry. You could still enjoy a yummy dessert with your family, and this is a testament to human creativity and how even the bleakest of situations can never kill your sweet tooth. This is going to be an interesting one. Over the course of your life, you've probably never lived in a time where caviar wasn't worth at least a week's paycheck. It's one of the world's most expensive delicacies now, but it actually used to be an everyday food for a lot of fishermen back in the day, especially Russian and Parisian ones. That's just some fishing history for you. For centuries, fishermen who had territory around the Caspian Sea or the Black Sea would always catch sturgeons. But unlike the rich people of today, they would catch it for the meat of the fish itself. They'd typically just throw away most of the eggs, and it wasn't until the 1800s and 1900s that caviar really started to become this luxury item. Despite that, though, they swelled up in popularity a little too much. There were massive overfishing concerns that led to some pretty strict regulations. Wild caviar is now pretty rare, but it's still every bit the status symbol you've come to perceive it as. I really don't get paid that much money for a bunch of fish babies, though. But that's just me. Hopefully you too. Ravioli sandwiches are an unconventional, playful lunch option that taps into the beloved flavors of Italian cuisine while embracing the convenience of a sandwich. These emerged likely in response to the popularity of canned ravioli introduced by Chef Boyardee in the 1930s. The sandwich involves placing canned ravioli, filled with meat or cheese, between slices of bread, which can be toasted or grilled to meld the flavors and add a textural contrast to the soft ravioli filling. Known in some places as Italian sloppy joes or ravioli hero, these sandwiches gained a following among budget-conscious college students and anyone appreciating the melding of comforting Italian flavors with the easy handheld format of a sandwich. We're going to go forward in time a bit, all the way to the beginning of what most people consider the late 20th century, where stuffed zucchini boats first started becoming something you would hear about regularly. At bars, from your friends and colleagues, or your partners. They became really hot in the 60s and 70s when it felt like everyday people were trying another dish from a new country that hadn't really touched base in America yet. It was the first time people expanded their taste buds beyond the bacon, pancake, and hash brown breakfasts they were mostly used to. Plus, stuffed zucchini boats were really healthy. They were a lot better to eat than those aforementioned breakfasts. The best part was that you could really change up the fillings, so depending on what you wanted, you could have fully vegetarian zucchini boats or ones with ground beef stuffings. People say this is a part of Italian-American cooking, but a lot of Mediterranean cooking makes use of dishes similar to zucchini boats, like using stuffed peppers and vegetables like eggplants. Bologna and cheese stackers were pretty much the ideal American breakfast, something that carried the spirit of our nation as well as all the flavors we've grown to love. Sliced bologna would be layered with cheese from the finest wheels in all of the United States of America. It would be packed in wax paper too, which was a funny little trick, but I'll explain why it was so popular. See, the thing about wax paper is that it traps moisture and flavor in, and that means your stackers stay perfectly fine just the way they were after you first made them. Bologna was always something we've had a deep appreciation for, and this stacker variant just proved that no matter how much the landscape of American cuisine changes, some habits die hard, and some just don't die at all. Not only was it just a good thing to eat before or after work, it was the perfect lunch to carry in a box with you. Plus, by the end of the 20th century, most offices had microwaves too, and you could always just find slices of bologna for cheap at most convenience stores. It was this kind of low-effort, easy-to-source and assemble style of cooking that would overtake America soon enough, and I think that's a part of why a lot of us prefer a latte instead of a sandwich now, ironically enough. There are only a few specific cuts of the cow that are really prized in value. Brisket doesn't happen to be one of them. It comes from the chest, and that's full of really tough muscle and really chewy connective tissue. Meaning that historically, this was a meat eater's last resort, or one of them. Now, braising brisket helped make it tender, but a lot of people thought it was just too much effort for not enough buck. I can't really explain how the next 10 seconds happened historically because sometimes these trends just explode, but I can narrate it all to you. After the people were over braising it, Texas ranchers and Mexican cowboys began smoking brisket, and barbecue joints all over Texas took note and tried their own spin by smoking it for hours on wood. Texas slowly became known for this, and after World War II, it became a full-blown Texas barbecue Hall of Famer. You had people in Austin, Lockhart, and Houston going balls to the wall insane over the delicious taste of this, upper, middle, and lower class alike. The barbecue joints didn't really miss out on that. They raised their prices accordingly, and brisket actually happened to triple or quadruple in markets. This used to be a bargain meat you would try your best to get rid of, and it actually became the reason why a lot of butchers' families got to eat good meat later on. Speaking of those times, another really good source of protein was catfish, and one of the best ways to have it was fried catfish with hush puppies. This is again something that'll take us right to the heart of Southern cooking if we eat it. Along those rural places near rivers, lakes, ponds, and other bodies of water where you could find fresh catfish in abundance. Hush puppies were something made with fried cornmeal batter and were a popular dish to give to soldiers during the Civil War, so all in all, this dish was really light money-wise. Some basic Cajun spices or a Southern spice blend would make it even better into a real full-fledged meal that you could eat in comfort with the family. While it's been a big part of Southern cooking ever since the 19th century, it arguably had its biggest glory days in the 20th one as part of Southern soul food. There was a time in the 30s to 40s where soul food started to get into more and more menus across several places in the South, which wasn't always the case. Thank God it did, though, because steamed catfish definitely doesn't hit the spot quite like fried ones do with some golden brown hush puppies. You might think that boiled animal hooves are something that only a survivalist would eat, and indeed, during the Dust Bowl, they were the only thing keeping some families going. When meat became unaffordable and gelatin packets were a luxury, hooves came in handy, literally and metaphorically. Animal hooves, preferably cow or pig, were used and boiled to make a broth that was as useful and as ugly sounding as it can get in our ears today. The long cooking process tenderized collagen present in hooves and made it into a natural binder for soups, stews, and even sweets. Yes, you heard it correctly, desserts. Gelatin from hooves was the secret behind the wobble in aspics, jellies, and custards. This was not about getting by. It was about getting the most out of each part of the animal. Hooves cooked were a rich source of protein and minerals and were a great food source during the lean periods. And even though they were not the most attractive, they ensured that bellies were filled and bodies were built. Today, such concepts as boiling hooves may cause some people to have goosebumps. However, in those days, it was business as usual. Dust Bowl meals were about subsistence, and at times, subsistence entails getting creative with what is available, or hoof. Cold pork pie was weird. It was supposed to be this British savory pastry that was probably the only dish best served cold after revenge, but I think it fell short on a lot of fronts. First, let's start with what constitutes a cold pork pie. This frigidly cold piece of British culture comes fully equipped with American favorites like lard, chopped or ground pork, nutmeg, mace, and lots of other stuffings. Plus, you know how people start experimenting with food and adding their own twists and turns wherever they can, no matter what. Who really sticks to tradition when you have like 5 different kinds of cheese to try? Anyway, while all of that sounds pretty good, fun, and a perfect environment for some serious brainstorming with what you can do with a pork pie, it was the savory jelly and cold aspect of it that kind of didn't stick too well. After the baking, you were supposed to pour a savory jelly made out of pork stock into the pie through a pretty tiny hole in the crust. Once the jelly would set and cool, it would enrich the flavor of the pie even more and help to preserve the meat as well. Pork pies were, for this reason, always served cold. However, America is a place that's really used to having their pork pies hot. And as you can probably tell, that's why you don't see bakeries, homes, or offices having cold pork pie days anymore. Blue crab was a really common and affordable food for a lot of coastal communities. It has become a sought-after item in places like Maryland and Louisiana and the Carolinas. But how did it get here? Blue crab was considered an everyday coastal food that was abundant among fish markets and fishermen. You would go take a walk along the East Coast and the Gulf Coast, and all you would ever see is a seemingly endless supply of blue crab that would never really go down either. For a lot of working-class families, this was a staple protein that was really helping them get through the day, while also making sure they were meeting their nutrition needs. Now, the labor process here was really hard. It took a lot to make blue crab, and cracking blue crabs to get the different kinds of meat was really time-consuming. It meant that they were less desirable for other consumers who basically would prefer lobster or oysters, especially the rich kind. They were really cheap and they weren't ever given away in fishing towns. People made use of everything they could, mostly because they were so available, you know? While you would think that would mean that people would essentially always sell the excess fish, they would actually just stock up on it for winters and consume it. Blue crab started to become expensive thanks to the rise of commercial fishing and a lot of environmental work that had risen in the Chesapeake Bay. Blue crab populations were starting to decline really sharply, and it became a thing of national concern. That and the high labor cost meant that blue crab was starting to get really pricey. By now, you must be getting an idea of how many basic things really slipped out of people's hands, including once common delicacies like sour cream. People found a good replacement that met them halfway for more or less the same experience in potato flour sour cream, which used potato flour and sugar to copy the essential taste of sour cream. It came pretty close too, if we do say so ourselves. You do not have to hear it from us though, just search this classic World War II recipe up and you will find many references dating back to this era about the recipe. This would later go on to inspire dishes like sour cream potato rolls in more stable times, and folks still kept the recipe in rotation. This sandwich would go great with some fresh fruit fluff salad, which was perfect for all kinds of occasions. Casual brunches, bridal showers, birthdays, and holiday gatherings all felt a little incomplete in the northern areas of America without this fruit fluff salad. It was a pretty good summer dish, and it had an assortment of fruits that worked well and bounced off of each other's textures and tastes. Stuff like a creamy lemon base supplemented with fresh strawberries or blueberries was a typical standard for a fresh fruit fluff salad, but you could also get tropical with kiwis and pineapples. A lot of things worked, and the reason it goes great with a Croak Madame is because ham was usually used as a topping for this dish too, so it was a great pairing. Speaking of meaty sandwiches, the Turkey Club sandwich was another fan favorite. Now, this one was known for its 3 layers of bread, which made it stand out from the rest of the sandwiches on the table. The club sandwich has its roots in American culinary history, with some sources suggesting it was first served in private social clubs in the late 19th century. By the time Grandma was making them, it had already become the talk of the town. Gram often made this one the day after Thanksgiving when there was no shortage of leftover roast turkey in the refrigerator. The key ingredient in this sandwich was crispy bacon, which Gram added to make it kid-friendly and 10 times more delicious. Grandma's Turkey Club sandwich was often cut in quarters or halves, which made it easier to eat, and this was the first time sandwiches were cut diagonally. And remember the toothpicks Gram used to hold it together with colorful cellophane frills? Brings back memories, doesn't it? Next up, a dish that sounds almost too simple to be true: tomato sauce with mashed potatoes. I know, it doesn't exactly scream gourmet, but remember, we're talking about a time when people were just trying to survive. This combo was a way to stretch those precious few ingredients. During the Great Depression, potatoes were a cheap and filling staple, and tomato sauce was an easy way to add flavor. This dish was essentially a plate of creamy mashed potatoes topped with a savory tomato sauce. It might sound a bit unusual, but this combination was a hit because it was cheap, easy to make, and comforting. Plus, potatoes were versatile. You could mash them, fry them, or bake them depending on what you had. So, if you're ever in the mood for a simple yet tasty meal, try tomato sauce with mashed potatoes. Let's see if this humble dish can impress our modern taste buds. Green tomato pie is something that'll have you running back for seconds. First off, you gotta hand it to whoever made this dish for their ingenuity. It's not every day you get a banger of a dish that actually is centered around making the green tomato shine out of everything else. But Southern home cooking will do that for you. Charlotte's green tomato pie in particular makes use of some typical Southern spices like cinnamon and nutmeg and unripened green tomatoes, and has you making a pie that'll rival even the best apple ones you could find at bakeries. Green tomatoes have an especially great harvest during the fall, so that's when this dish would see the most mileage. You would find houses all over the South constantly making green tomato pies, and this specific pie is an example of how you don't need anything fancy to create something that can get everyone at the table. You know what's even funnier? This dish is one of the best things to come out of mock cooking because it was made to imitate mock apple pie and mincemeat pies. An imitation of an imitation ends up giving us something that was a big part of Southern culture. Who would have thought? If you believe that eating insects is a modern, sustainable practice, you are wrong. In the Dust Bowl, crispy fried grasshoppers were not a joke. They were a staple food. During the poor harvests, and when meat was hard to come by, farmers looked to the hordes of grasshoppers feeding on the crops. Talk about revenge dining. Hunting grasshoppers was a family event, and when you had gathered enough grasshoppers in a bucket, then the cooking process started. They were washed, marinated, and then fried to a crisp golden brown. The result? A crunchy snack that contained protein and was not too shabby if one didn't consider what they were consuming. Grasshoppers are in fact a form of superfood as they contain high protein, iron, and good fats. The Dust Bowl families were not consciously trying to innovate, but they were able to feed themselves in a way that many others could not. Also, if you fry anything, it automatically becomes at least 50% tastier, doesn't it? Nowadays, insects are being considered as a source of food, but in the past, crispy grasshoppers were a means of feeding oneself. Tuna salad made a fresh comeback, which helped extend its shelf life in the American homemade breakfast or lunch scene. The tuna salad everyone was already pretty accustomed to was reconstructed, this time with seasonal and tropical fruits like apples or cranberries and served in fresh pita sliced in half. Not only was this really healthy, but it was also intensely high in protein and carbs, so it helped you build that all-important muscle while keeping you full until a suitable time in the evening. Cannot give in to those post-meal munchie cravings, right? Tuna salad was great served as is, but some people would go a step further by baking it for a while too. All right, let's talk about a real comfort food of the Depression: bean in tomato stew. Beans were a go-to ingredient during the Depression days because of how nutritious, affordable, and versatile they are. It's basically just what it sounds like: beans cooked in a tomato-based broth. But you could also throw in potatoes, carrots, and maybe even a little bit of rice for extra substance. The beans provided a good source of protein and fiber, while the tomato sauce added a burst of flavor. This stew could be enjoyed on its own or served over rice, bread, or even mashed potatoes if you were lucky enough to have them. Originally, Native Americans sweetened baked beans with maple syrup, but then someone decided to turn this protein into a stew, and hey, we're not complaining. It was a filling meal back in the day, and it's still cooked in many households around America where the budget is a bit too tight. I know this dish might sound plain, but believe me, when your belly is rumbling and your pantry is bare, this stew can be a lifesaver. Remember when we said that there are salads that use spinaches and kale? Welcome to the Wedge Salad, which uses spinach, lettuce, and kale with a blue cheese dressing to make one of the most impeccable salads you have ever had. If a home cook ever wanted to stun the crowd at a summer party or a Thanksgiving lunch, this wedge salad was the go-to option for stealing the show. Plus, the best part was that it was ready in just about 15 minutes. For the finish, you would sprinkle tomatoes, onion, and bacon on each part of the salad to add a delightful and much-needed crunch to go along with the greens. Would you try this? It certainly meets a lot of health needs that people have. Hoppin' John is a dish that has some pretty rich heritage. I'm talking about African, Caribbean, and Native American roots that all boil together in the melting pot known as the South, where it first started becoming really trendy. However, the origins of the dish are actually a bit darker than just a happy coincidence that somehow got into everyone's table. Though the people who were eating it happily wouldn't know, it was first created and brought over by enslaved Africans in the American South. It made use of African rice and pork, and yes, the best part of the dish were the black-eyed peas even in those times. Now, as far as the name Hoppin' John is considered, nobody really ever knew where it first came from, or if there was a John who made this dish and brought it into everyone's lives. But the first time this name was mentioned was in the 1840s in a print. If you were down in the South in African American communities during New Year, then you would especially see a lot of Hoppin' Johns everywhere. The aroma of those peas and the smoked pork wouldn't miss anyone's nose, as the scent carried for miles and miles away. It was eaten specifically on New Year's because it was a common belief that eating Hoppin' Johns would bring good luck to people if they ate it to start the year. If you went into any new year with such a good plate of food, I'd say your luck was already pretty good. So maybe it does work? Rice salad with curry dressing is probably the epitome of the whole health consciousness movement that dominated so much of the second half of the 90s. Rice salad with curry dressing would also often be made with much healthier ingredients than what people were used to, such as brown rice, quinoa, and more. Bell peppers, cucumbers, and spinach were also popular ingredients to throw in there. To be honest, it's a bit like a chicken katsu curry rice bowl, but without the katsu curry or the fried chicken fillets. This was something we took inspiration from a lot of different cultures from. One of the most popular ones was the Mediterranean version, which really emphasized the use of olives. But people also tried spicier Spanish recipes or more tame and flavorful Italian ones. There were all kinds of ways to have your rice salad, but it was dishes like these that set the stage for curries to become a main, trendy food in America. Once something starts being a work lunch, you know it's made it to the big leagues. It summarizes a lot of what was going on in the 90s too. A push for more healthier food, a strong desire for transportable, easier-to-make recipes, and a fusion of different cultures, recipes, and ideas to basically create uncharted territory. Its golden days from the 20th century aren't something we have anymore, but it's still a knockout option to go for if you're trying to switch your lunch up a little. Rice salad with curry dressing is probably the epitome of the whole health consciousness movement that dominated so much of the second half of the 90s. Rice salad with curry dressing would also often be made with much healthier ingredients than what people were used to, such as brown rice, quinoa, and more. Bell peppers, cucumbers, and spinach were also popular ingredients to throw in there. To be honest, it's a bit like a chicken katsu curry rice bowl, but without the katsu curry or the fried chicken fillets. This was something we took inspiration from a lot of different cultures from. One of the most popular ones was the Mediterranean version, which really emphasized the use of olives. But people also tried spicier Spanish recipes or more tame and flavorful Italian ones. There were all kinds of ways to have your rice salad, but it was dishes like these that set the stage for curries to become a main, trendy food in America. Once something starts being a work lunch, you know it's made it to the big leagues. It summarizes a lot of what was going on in the 90s too. A push for more healthier food, a strong desire for transportable, easier-to-make recipes, and a fusion of different cultures, recipes, and ideas to basically create uncharted territory. Its golden days from the 20th century aren't something we have anymore, but it's still a knockout option to go for if you're trying to switch your lunch up a little. This recipe really made a name for itself during the mid-1930s to 40s when people were facing a dire shortage of eggs. Still, if you did not have even some potatoes on hand but still wanted a pancake to cheer your kids up, you would go for eggless pancakes. Some shortening, sugar, milk, and salt were all you needed to make this version of the beloved American dish, plus just some water to bind if you could not find any milk to spare. Lucky were the homes that had lard, as that really made for some fluffy and thick cakes, but complaining was not really something people did during those times. A simple recipe like this let them revisit the taste of pancakes from back when they had fully stocked fridges, after all. Turkey and cranberry sandwiches are a bit of a hit or miss depending on the kind of stuff you prefer, but throughout Thanksgiving, you'd basically see people bringing nothing else but this. Why? Well, I know that you all know cranberries and cranberry jams, sauces, and desserts get really popular around Thanksgiving, but have you ever wondered why? Spoiler alert, it's not just tradition. See, across the Appalachians to California, throughout Wisconsin and Northern America, cranberries have been one of the few things that were always indigenous to our country. That's why we abuse them to the moon and back, you know? Then you throw in canned cranberries and convenience stores popping up in every neighborhood, and well, you start to see how people end up with so many leftovers. Turkey and cranberry sandwiches would be made so often to dispose of leftover cranberries that it wouldn't be uncommon to see pretty much everyone at work pulling up with one of these, though that did mean they got old really fast. Probably why nobody brings them anymore, to be honest. Liverwurst and onion sandwiches were a really straightforward dish. There wasn't a lot going on here, and it was really just a 3-ingredient dish. Finally, we're going to back sandwiches we can actually recognize and digest. Who has their stuff cold? Not me. Liverwurst and onion sandwiches luckily aren't exactly things you serve cold either. This is a dish best served piping hot. See, liverwurst in itself is just a sausage that's been made with liver and some other parts of meat. Then you take in some raw onions and sauté them, serve them between slices of toasted bread with cheese, and there you go. Liverwurst is something we got from European and German communities, and it was really popular in areas like Detroit and Pennsylvania, where there were strong populations of European communities. Liverwurst was typically always blended with warm spices like allspice and nutmeg too, so you could either make it into this flavorful pâté or slice it and layer it with other kinds of things as well as cheese, of course. It's something that just faded out of relevance, though. It wasn't bad or impractical, but I guess it was a little too simple. Liverwurst and onion sandwiches were a really straightforward dish. There wasn't a lot going on here, and it was really just a 3-ingredient dish. Finally, we're going to back sandwiches we can actually recognize and digest. Who has their stuff cold? Not me. Liverwurst and onion sandwiches luckily aren't exactly things you serve cold either. This is a dish best served piping hot. See, liverwurst in itself is just a sausage that's been made with liver and some other parts of meat. Then you take in some raw onions and sauté them, serve them between slices of toasted bread with cheese, and there you go. Liverwurst is something we got from European and German communities, and it was really popular in areas like Detroit and Pennsylvania, where there were strong populations of European communities. Liverwurst was typically always blended with warm spices like allspice and nutmeg too, so you could either make it into this flavorful pâté or slice it and layer it with other kinds of things as well as cheese, of course. It's something that just faded out of relevance, though. It wasn't bad or impractical, but I guess it was a little too simple. Back in the day, when you were out of just about everything except sugar, flour, and fruit, a vinegar cobbler was your only option. No surprise that it was also known as one of the famous desperation pies. Desperation pies are pies in American cuisine made using staple ingredients like butter, sugar, eggs, flour, and any other ingredients that cooks had on hand to complement them or substitute for ingredients that were out of season or too expensive. These pies were more common before refrigeration and canned pie fillings, and during times of hardship like the Great Depression and rationing of World War II. When fresh fruits were hard to come by, people turned to vinegar to mimic the tartness of fruits like apples and lemons. This cobbler used a mixture of vinegar, sugar, and spices to create a filling that, when baked, tasted surprisingly similar to a fruit cobbler. Instead of chunks of fresh apples, those on a budget would use apple cider vinegar to fake the acidic taste. The crust was made from basic pantry staples like flour, sugar, and butter or lard. The dish reportedly tasted like a custard made from salt and vinegar chips, a rare dessert that leaves the roof of your mouth tingling. Bubble and squeak was something that completely fit the situations most people would find themselves in during the war, because this dish is all about the leftovers. Usually, Sunday dinner's leftovers would be used in a bubble and squeak to make sure nothing went to waste. Plus, people would definitely take that sentiment to heart when it came to holiday dinners where there were enough things left to constitute at least 2 or 3 meals the next day. Usually, this dish is made with potatoes and cabbage and is fried, so it goes properly and amazingly with some potato flotties or other items on the list. Maybe you can take a note from people's books the next time you think you have nothing to eat, but plenty of things still left in the fridge. Up next, we have a dish that was all about making the most out of simple ingredients: spaghetti, boiled carrots, and white sauce casserole. It can be argued that Eleanor Roosevelt did the best she could during the Great Depression. The First Lady promoted dishes to encourage savvy homemakers, such as a casserole made from spaghetti, boiled carrots, and a simple white sauce of milk, flour, salt, and butter. The spaghetti had to be cooked for 25 minutes. The idea was to get the noodles mushy so they paired nicely with the boiled carrots and a penny's worth of creamy sauce. The result? A vehicle for nutrition and nutrients. Families loved this dish because it was versatile and could easily be modified based on what was available. It was a great way to fill up hungry bellies without breaking the bank. It still makes a pretty delicious meal for potlucks, so if you want to impress everyone with something easy to whip up, the spaghetti, boiled carrots, and white sauce casserole will do. If one of these forgotten lunches brought back a memory or made you hungry for more, drop your favorite in the comments, hit like, and subscribe so we can keep serving up the past one bite at a time.